The Trump team says, and some even directly claim, that the conflict could be frozen on the condition of a guaranteed delay of Ukraine's NATO membership for 10-20 years. What do you think of such a formula?
Who is saying that?
In the Trump administration, there are also discussions referring to the special envoy for the Ukrainian crisis on this matter.
I see. I don't know what is being said now in the forming team of the elected President of the United States. What I do know is that in 2021, the current President Biden, this is not a secret, suggested exactly this to me, to delay Ukraine's NATO membership for 10-15 years because it is not ready now. To which I reasonably responded, well, yes, it is not ready today, but you will prepare it and accept it. In terms of historical distances and timelines, this is an instant. For us, what difference does it make today, tomorrow, or in 10 years? I am not familiar with the statements of the future team of the elected president. You know, it's not about the outcomes of these 2 days, it's about the outcomes of the year. There are indicators, they are official, no one disputes them. They are objective data. We have a significant increase in trade turnover, despite the recession among many of our traditional partners. In the Eurozone, you know, there is a 1% increase, while in Belarus, 5.4-5.5% growth will be seen by the end of the year. In Russia, we are also generally satisfied with the results, around 3.9, most likely close to 4%. But in Belarus, 5.5%. That's a good result. In Armenia, for example, it's even higher. The trade turnover between Russia and Armenia has doubled compared to last year. It has doubled and will amount to more than 10 billion by the end of the year. And this is the case with almost all countries. That's the result. As for the work of the last 2 days, I can say briefly, we have become closer to each other. You know...
Hey, deep diver. You ready to jump in the deep end?
Always.
All right. Today, we're going deep into the mind of, well, Vladimir Putin.
Should be interesting.
It really should. We're dissecting a recent year-end interview he gave to Russian media, of course.
Of course.
To see what it tells us about, well, a lot of things.
Right.
His thinking on the war in Ukraine, obviously.
Big one.
Huge. Russia's economy and,
yeah,
you know, just trying to get a sense of what makes this world leader tick.
Yeah, it's a fascinating window into how he's framing things for his people, yeah, but also for, you know, the world at large.
Absolutely. And right off the bat, Putin paints this surprisingly rosy picture of Russia's economy.
Yeah.
Especially considering, well,
everything.
Global recession, yeah.
Yeah.
He throws out figures like 3.9 to 4% GDP growth, a 55% increase in trade with Belarus.
Right.
Trade with Armenia has more than doubled, over $1 billion.
It certainly sounds impressive, but those figures, I mean, you have to take them with a grain of salt, right?
Oh, absolutely.
You know, got to remember who is presenting them and what their agenda might be.
Exactly. It's not exactly unbiased data.
Right.
But are there any real factors driving this economic resilience? Or is this, you know, smoke and mirrors?
Well, Russia has definitely benefited from pivoting to new trading partners after being hit with sanctions from the West, you know, particularly in Asia, Africa, the Middle East. That diversification has helped soften the blow.
Yep.
And then, of course, they still have those vast natural resources, especially energy that the world, you know, needs.
Still needs.
Yeah.
So it's not just propaganda. There's actually something behind those numbers.
Yeah.
But can this last? I mean, what are the long-term implications here?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
Russia faces some major challenges down the road. We're talking potential brain drain as skilled professionals, you know, head for the exits, technological stagnation because of the sanctions, and the impact of being isolated from Western markets. So, you know, while the short-term picture might be looking up, from Putin's perspective at least, there are some dark clouds gathering on the horizon.
So maybe not time to break out the champagne just yet.
Not quite yet.
All right, well, let's move on to the elephant in the room, the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. What signals did Putin send out about that?
One of the most intriguing things he brought up was this claim that President Biden actually suggested delaying Ukraine's NATO membership back in 2021.
Oh, wow.
He even recounts an anecdote about his response, saying something like, what difference does it make?
What difference does it make?
Today, tomorrow, or in 10 years?
Well, hold on. Is he serious?
What?
How much weight can we give to this claim about Biden's proposal?
It's tough to say for sure without corroboration from, other sources.
Yeah.
It's certainly possible that Putin is using this anecdote strategically to maybe stir the pot between Western allies or, position himself as the level-headed one in all this.
Right. Classic information warfare tactics then.
Possibly, yeah. Trying to control the narrative.
Shape how people see it.
Exactly. But even if the anecdote is, embellished or taken out of context, I think it gives us a glimpse into how Putin thinks strategically.
Yeah.
Particularly his perception of time. That dismissal of the difference between, today, tomorrow, 10 years, suggests he sees this conflict as part in a much longer game. A struggle for power playing out over decades, not just years.
That's a chilling thought. It's like he's operating on a different time scale than everyone else.
Yeah, it does seem that way sometimes.
But getting down to brass tacks.
Yeah.
What was Putin's assessment of the actual military situation on the ground?
Well, he painted this picture of Russian troops bravely fighting against the odds.
Okay.
Even shares this vivid anecdote about them crossing water obstacles.
Really?
Yeah. With their rifles held high above their heads, he's clearly emphasizing their struggle, the commitment to the cause.
It's a powerful image for sure. But how much does this portrayal line up with, what's actually happening in Ukraine?
That's where things get a bit murky.
Okay.
While there's no doubt that Russian troops have faced challenges, independent reports suggest a more complicated picture than the heroic one that Putin's presenting.
Yeah.
There are accounts of low morale, equipment shortages, logistical issues that paint a less inspiring and, frankly, more grim reality.
So is this strategic posturing on his part? Trying to project strength and confidence despite the setbacks?
It's likely a combination of factors. Trying to bolster morale at home, present a strong front to the West, and maybe even convince himself that victory is still attainable.
Speaking of victory, did he actually address Russia's chances of winning the war directly?
He did. He expressed absolute confidence in Russia's eventual victory.
Okay.
But was very careful to avoid giving a specific timeline or even defining what victory would look like in practical terms.
Right. So lots of vague promises and patriotic appeals, but not a lot of concrete detail.
Exactly. Classic political maneuvering.
Maintain that image of strength.
Yeah.
But keep your options open.
Huh?
But on the subject of military capabilities, there was that intriguing mention of a weapon system called Oreznik.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that?
Oreznik, powerful weapon system.
Okay.
And Putin specifically points out that Russia is not in any rush to deploy it. He even adds this rather pointed comment. If needed, we will see that the use of more powerful medium-range weapons will be required.
That sounds ominous, like a veiled threat of escalation. What do you make of that?
Could be interpreted that way for sure. But it's also possible that this is a genuine strategic consideration.
Yeah.
Remember, Putin's all about calculated restraint and control.
So maybe he's dangling this powerful weapon
Yeah.
as a way to deter further escalation.
Yeah.
Kind of don't push me too far message.
Exactly. It's a classic example of what experts call escalation dominance. Imagine it like having a toolbox. Right. Full of options, from, a subtle nudge to a sledgehammer. And you choose the right tool for the job.
Right.
To maintain control of the situation. So this Oreznik mention could be a way of reminding everyone that he has more tools in the box if he needs them.
Right. And it's important to remember that he has a history of using this type of tactic.
Oh, yeah.
Think back to,
It's certainly a reminder that he's willing to escalate if he feels it's necessary. But speaking of calculated moves, Putin also spent time talking about his concern for the well-being of the Russian people amidst all this.
Yeah, he emphasized that, didn't he?
Yeah.
Talking about stabilizing inflation, economic growth, continuing social support programs, even stating outright that the most important thing is the well-being of the Russian people.
Yeah.
All sounds very caring and compassionate, but how does that square with the realities of war and economic sanctions? How are these economic and social concerns playing out in terms of public opinion on the conflict?
Yeah. That's the complex part. On the one hand, there's undoubtedly a level of patriotic fervor and support for Putin's actions. But on the other hand, those sanctions are having a real impact and ordinary Russians are feeling the pinch. There's growing anxiety about what the future holds, and the longer this drags on, the more likely that support will start to waver.
So Putin's walking a tightrope here, keeping the people on side while pursuing his geopolitical goals. Is this genuine concern for his people or just a way to maintain support for the war?
It's probably a mix of both. He genuinely believes in the need for a strong Russia that can stand up to the West, but he also understands the importance of having the people behind him. And in a country like Russia, where the lines between state power and individual well-being can get blurred, those two things can easily become intertwined.
So it's realpolitik meets social welfare. But let's zoom in on a specific example of this, Putin's discussion about housing certificates for those displaced by the war. He highlighted the program in the KSK region where people can use these certificates to repair damaged homes or even buy new ones in other parts of Russia. But then he contrasted that with the approach in the Belgorod region, where residents get funds directly deposited into their accounts, but can only use the money for repairs, not for buying a new home elsewhere.
It's an interesting distinction, and Putin was very clear that he believes these decisions should be made at the local and regional level in direct dialogue with the people, no one-size-fits-all approach.
So he's advocating for regional autonomy and flexibility in how they respond to people's needs.
Precisely. But this raises some questions about the balance of power between the federal government and those regional authorities.
Right. On the one hand, it seems like he's empowering local leaders to make decisions based on their specific circumstances. But on the other hand, could this also be a way for the federal government to distance itself from any problems or dissatisfaction with the support being provided?
Exactly. It's a clever strategy that lets Putin maintain a degree of control while also appearing responsive to local needs. And this is particularly interesting when you consider that support for the war varies across different regions of Russia.
That's a great point. So by pushing regional autonomy, he can appease those areas that are more skeptical of the war effort while still solidifying support in the regions where it's more popular.
Precisely. It's a way to manage internal divisions and project an image of unity in the face of external pressures.
Smart, but also a little cynical when you think about it. These are people's lives we're talking about, not just pieces on a chessboard. But speaking of potential hotspots where Putin might be trying to exert influence, that brings us to Moldova. The Foreign Intelligence Service, the SVR, issued a report saying Moldova could become the next flashpoint, and then the Ministry of Foreign Affairs piled on with accusations about Western attempts to destabilize the situation in Transnistria.
It's certainly a concerning development. Moldova is a small country with a long history of geopolitical turmoil, and its proximity to Ukraine makes it especially vulnerable to spillover from the conflict.
Okay, but break it down for us. What are the underlying tensions in Moldova? Why is it such a potential powder keg?
It's a complicated mix of historical, political, and ethnic factors. Transnistria, a breakaway region within Moldova, has been a source of tension for decades. It's predominantly Russian-speaking and has strong ties to Russia, whereas the rest of Moldova leans more towards Europe.
So it's kind of a microcosm of the bigger conflict between Russia and the West.
You could say that, and it makes Moldova a prime target for Russian influence and a potential flashpoint for further escalation.
But how credible are these claims about external interference? Is there any evidence to back them up, or is this just more Russian propaganda?
It's always tough to separate fact from fiction in these situations. There's no doubt Russia has a long history of meddling in its neighbors' affairs, and there's definitely evidence of their influence in Transnistria.
But is that the same as actively trying to destabilize the entire country? It seems like they've got their hands full with Ukraine already.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But remember, Putin's a master strategist, always thinking several steps ahead. It's entirely possible he sees Moldova as a way to pressure the West, create more instability in the region, or even open up a new front in the conflict.
That's a chilling thought. So what are the chances that Moldova actually becomes another Ukraine?
It's impossible to say for sure, but the risk is definitely there. The situation is highly volatile, and even a seemingly small incident could trigger a much wider conflict.
Okay, that's a lot to digest.
Yeah.
We've gone from Putin's economic pronouncements to his strategic calculations on Ukraine and Moldova and how he's trying to walk that line between domestic stability and his geopolitical ambitions. It's complex, to say the least.
Absolutely. But amidst all these complex issues and strategic maneuverings, it's important to remember one crucial thing. Putin is not just a political leader, he's also a human being. And this interview gave us some glimpses into who that human being is.
That's an interesting angle.
Sure.
So what insights did we get into Putin the person as opposed to Putin the president?
Yeah.
And we got to see the man behind the curtain. So what struck you about Putin's personality and his approach to leadership?
Well, throughout the interview, I noticed this recurring theme of control.
Yeah.
Whether he was discussing the economy, the military situation, or even, those housing certificates for displaced people, there was this constant emphasis on order, a very carefully managed approach.
Which makes sense given his background, right?
Yeah.
Ex-KGB and all that.
Yeah, you can definitely see that influence, but I think it goes deeper than his personal history. This focus on control reflects a deep-seated belief in a strong, centralized state. A state that can steer Russia through turbulent times, and that belief system is very much tied to his vision of Russia's place in the world.
So it's not just about Putin the man, it's about a whole philosophy of governance.
Exactly. He sees Russia as a great power, destined for a leading role globally. And to achieve that, he believes Russia needs a strong leader at the helm, someone who can project strength and make those tough decisions.
Okay, so that explains a lot about his actions both internally and on the world stage. But how does this emphasis on control mesh with his claim of being, predictable and balanced? Aren't those two things kind of at odds?
That's where it gets interesting. On the surface, those ideas might seem contradictory, but from Putin's point of view, they're actually two sides of the same coin.
Okay, help me out here.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Think of it this way. Predictability in Putin's mind isn't about being passive or predictable in the usual sense. It's about establishing clear boundaries, drawing those red lines in the sand, and reacting in a very deliberate, measured way when those lines are crossed.
So it's more about setting the parameters and then letting things play out within those limits, kind of like a controlled burn.
Exactly, and that's where the balance comes in. He's not reckless, he's not impulsive. He weighs his options, carefully assesses the risks, and chooses the path he believes best serves Russia's long-term interests.
That makes a lot more sense now. It's not about being predictable in a boring way. It's about being strategic, calculated, and control.
Precisely. And that's a key takeaway from this deep dive. Putin's leadership is all about control, but it's a very nuanced, multifaceted kind of control. It's about shaping the narrative, setting the agenda, and dictating the terms of engagement.
Wow, that's pretty insightful. So after dissecting this interview and unpacking Putin's words and actions, what's the bottom line? What does all this tell us about what might lie ahead?
Well, the future is always unpredictable, especially with someone as complex and calculating as Putin. But this interview offers some valuable clues about his mindset, his objectives, his approach. It reinforces that he's playing a long game one with high stakes and global implications.
So basically, buckle up, deep divers. The ride's not over yet.
Exactly. And that brings us to our final thought for you today. As you continue to watch the events unfold in Ukraine, Moldova, and around the world, consider this. What does this interview reveal about the limits of our understanding? What questions remain unanswered? And what does that tell us about the challenges of navigating a world shaped by figures like Putin?
That's a great point to leave our listeners pondering. So, deep diver, what are your takeaways from Putin's statements? Is he a master strategist playing the long game, or is this all just a carefully constructed facade? The answer, as always, is more complex than a single interview can reveal. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and stay curious.